missed last week and then had to miss again this week, and he indicated he's still recovering from that. But the subtext of everything he said is, I'm fine, but maybe a little tired still in it. So Hal is good. Let me begin this way. I've been saying through this is that we are operating. One of the things that makes the insights in this class possible is the fact that we know what the text of the Old Testament is. We know a fair bit about the history of Israel. And that's sort of shot through history. You know, that information, the texts of the Bible in the Christian world, that has all reached us. And so we have great abundance in that. But something that hadn't reached us until relatively recently, you know, when a theologian says recently, he means in the last 1,000 years. So that's recent for a theologian, you know, and for scientists, it's the last 10 minutes. But so relatively recently, there has been a surge of information about the societies round about ancient Israel. And when we understand more about them, then we're in a position to compare those two societies. And it's in the comparison that these insights came about. These aren't ones that I generated. This is the work of Rabbi Joshua Bierman. And I'm just beginning, even at this late stage in my ministry, I'm just beginning to recognize that there is an incredible resource of practical insight into life and humanity and society, politics, that arises out of the Old Testament, that is part of the heritage, our heritage of having Judaism be our parent faith. And I keep looking at the work of Jewish scholars, which is a little different than that of Christians. I keep looking at their work and thinking, this I need to be paying attention to this, because Joshua Bierman's book. So if you're inclined, to if what we're talking about here, look at Created Equal and get the fulsome and responsible and really very elegant presentation of what we're talking about. I think his book was published by Oxford. So, I mean, that tells you right there that this is going to be top drawer stuff. And he's one of the leading rabbis in the world. He's got a prominence that is, similar to that of others. So anyway, now, one of the reasons we have this information and when that came about was in the middle of the 19th century. So that's what I mean by recently. I mean, Christianity was 100 years old at this point, and then we began to learn some stuff. And that story is just absolutely fascinating, is how this emerged and came into our realization and the impact that it had on Christian faith, both in Europe and in the United States, the fundamentalist modernist controversy, which was a drama that played out in the seminary that George and I went to. So, that's kind of exciting. This was in our school, and but that was even before I was there, and actually it was a long time before George was there.
Not even recently.
I'm resisting all temptations to make any jokes about age. So, one of the great discoveries in this is a concept called form criticism. Form criticism. It was invented by a guy named Helmut Gunkel and Hermann Gunkel in the 19th century. And this is a fairly simple insight, is that if I say something like, once upon a time, there lived ... And then I ended that with, and everyone lived happily ever after. What would I be? What kind of,
Fairy tales.
it would be a fairy tale. It'd be a fairy tale. If I said, dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the presence of God to join. And then, I raised my hand and gave a closing blessing and say, you may kiss the bride. What would we be doing? It would be a wedding. Okay. So these would be the forms. If we found something like that, and we found that kind of language in a place or in a story, let's say, that otherwise it would not be appropriate. We wouldn't be in a church with a bride and a groom, would be somewhere else. Then that would be an interesting juxtaposition of wedding language and some other kind of story or something. So, okay, having said that, what's a protection racket? That's a jump. What's a protection racket?
Keep you healthy and wealthy, and that they get their cut. Offer not to hurt you for some payment.
Yeah, offered not to hurt you for some payment. So there's something of, that's right. That's what you end up in prison. I always have this fear that somehow I'm going to end up in prison, so, and I'm not even very misbehaved, but will I join the gang, or will I give up my money for protection? Ancient societies used the same principle. There were strong kingdoms, empires, places like Assyria, Babylon, the Roman Empire, Persian Empire, and so on. And there were little guys. And what happened is something like, as we understand, is a protection racket. In other words, the big guy could easily conquer the little guy, but there's nothing positive for anybody from just sheer destruction. So instead of sheer destruction, what the big kingdom would do, they would strike a rather cruel deal with the smaller kingdom. And there developed quite a ritual around establishing these treaties. And basically the treaties, I mean, what does the big kingdom want from the little king? They want their money. Tribute, exactly. That's the word. Tribute. And so, but they don't want to annihilate the smaller kingdom, but they also want to hang the threat of violence over them. I mean, we didn't clobber you this time, but we really will clobber you if you don't come up with a certain amount of cash. So some kind of deal is struck, and then that really bleeds the smaller kingdom. These kinds of arrangements grew up all around the ancient world, and they were, as I say, they were ritualized, and they took the form. There's a treaty, a sequence of things that happen in the striking of these treaties that we now know about, now that we've been able to learn something about what's going on in Mesopotamia, now that we've gotten some documents and have been able to interpret them and read them. That's a relatively new development. And so let's look at this sheet, if you will, with me. We're going to talk, this is what I'm talking about, is a suzerainty treaty. I can hardly even say the word suzerainty treaty. And these date way back to the Bronze Age, which, is around 1200 BC. And the top line up here gives I titled that Structure of the Ancient Near Eastern Treaties. This reads from left to right as we read sentences or lines on a page. So what these have, though there's 18 of these that have been extracted from the ancient world that we have, and they all bear a characteristic form. And I'll go through that quickly. There's a historical prologue. It's like, okay, you and I've done some things together. We've helped some people. We've had some cooperation. We've done a little trade. We've done a little military cooperation. But we go back, us, our two kingdoms. Oh, by the way, this is not who's talking here. It's the kings, right? This is king and king. This is a two-person conversation. Even though this has a ritual to it, it's not informal, it's formalized. And the king of the smaller entity is treated respectfully. Okay, so that it's hey, we're kings here. We talk to each other like gentlemen, even though I'm going to steal all your nation's money, so or you're going to give it to me. So there's this historical prologue about how we have a history together. And, we go back, and then there are the stipulations which lay out what the subordinate, it's actually what both parties will be doing. You're not going to strike a deal like this with anybody else. And you're going to send me a certain amount of your crop yield in your whole nation, tribute. And you're not going to take military action. You're not going to align with some other kingdom against me, and all of these kinds of things. And then the stipulation also on the larger one. And I won't kill you. I won't send my troops in. I won't lay siege to your cities. Okay, so those are the stipulations. There's an arrangement here, and then it's like we've written this all down, and we're going to give it a divine metaphysical sanction, which means you're going to put it in your temple. Okay. In some ways, this isn't just a couple of guys talking. This is important. This is an important arrangement, and you're going to treat it with religious reverence. Okay, that's why it's going to end up in your holy place, your temple, or it's going to be vested with a divine sanction. And then we're also going to call upon the gods to bear witness to what we have done this day. That extends this idea of sanctions. And then there's sort of a closing out of blessings and curses. The gods affirm the benefits and punishments for compliance. Okay, so that's an arrangement between two kings, and that's what sets up the entire relationship between two kingdoms. Now, what's interesting is that pattern seems to be mapped onto very important places in the Bible. So that if we go to the point in the book of Exodus, which begins at the 19th chapter, and we begin to look at what happens in an interview between Moses and God. Okay, 19th chapter, we begin to see the contours of a suzerainty treaty that plays out over the next couple of chapters. And so if you go, and I'm not going to take, you want a Bible here? Yeah. We have Bibles down there. Barbara, anybody want to look this up? I see Larry's gotten one. You've got a Bible? You got yours? Good. Well, I mean, we have, if anybody wants to look, because I'm trying to move fast here. Okay. But make a little bit of a complicated idea clear, because form criticism is important. This is the form. The form is a suzerainty treaty. We're finding elements of it, or the structure of it is rising up out of the text in the Old Testament. And so what I'm doing is trying to give you a sense of how this works. And if you go to the 20th chapter of, would someone read the Exodus 21 and 2, just to give an example? I don't have it.
God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery.
Okay, that's a historical prologue. Right? Some happens, we go back, and it's a happy something, we've done this. And then, keep reading on in Exodus 3, Exodus 20, verse 3. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's 3 chapters, 3.5 chapters. Yeah, but yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, this is really helpful because I don't even have a Bible in front of me right now.
How far are you on there?
I'll stop you. Okay.
You shall have no other gods before me. You should not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below.
Okay, we recognize this language. Thank you. We recognize this language. This is the 10 Commandments. Well, the 10 Commandments can be seen as the treaty stipulations in a suzerainty treaty. How cool is that? I mean, to detect that and to find that in context, tell them that in Louisiana when they put the copy of the 10 Commandments on the bulletin board in kids' classrooms. So then we go on, and there are elements that run through Exodus. And now I'm going very fast through this. If we drop that, thank you, by the way, for helping me with. If we go down to the Deuteronomic covenant, it's a very similar kind of situation, but the Deuteronomic covenant, which spans the entire book of Deuteronomy, bears the contours, the character of a suzerainty treaty. Now, if we're reading this and don't know about that, we're not going to see it. It's going to be invisible to us. That's why this has been invisible to us for so long, because we didn't even know about these treaties. So when I say we're learning something new in the coming from the Bible, even though we've heard these things before, it's suddenly, we all know the 10 Commandments. Many of us, if we went to Sunday school, memorized them. Suddenly we're seeing something new. Now, the purpose of lifting some of these things up and making them visible is that it helps us to begin to see some new elements here that that come implicitly out of the text. And the new element here is, it's probably going to be too much to ask you, because this is hard. The church and nobody has recognized this for such a long period of time. It's taken some really sophisticated scholarship and some period of time for us to realize this. But the interview of, if we think of God and Moses as two kings striking a treaty arrangement, we suddenly begin to see that there are some profound differences between what's going on in the Bible and what would have otherwise been going on if two kings had gotten together and made an arrangement, a protection arrangement. And one of the things is that Moses is not a king. And the stipulations that are laid upon Moses are not ones that can be fulfilled by a king. And that the ratification of this treaty is not something that Moses is empowered to do. He's got to carry, and we all remember this from Sunday school, he's got to carry the treaty down to the people, and he's got to read the sucker to them in its entirety. We talked about that last week. And they got to have a show of hands or something like that. Yeah, we're going to do this. So what to me is revolutionary is that the people are now fulfilling the role of the king. There is a royal implication about the nature of people in this treaty arrangement. There are other differences too, is that the treaty arrangement, if you go to a prison, the guy that comes up to you and says it's going to cost you all of your cigarette rations in order to keep you from getting beaten up. That's not a Valentine. That's unfriendly. But we notice that the character of this treaty is essentially a loving contract between God and God's people. So there is, okay, this is a class about how, right, the compression, the squish, is that the high and mighty are coming down and those who are lowly are being lifted up. This is a monumental implication that's structured into the very character of Israel's life and the very character of the Old Testament, which elevates all of the people. So, and it elevates them into a royal status. And it diminishes the king. There's no king here. This is a state in Israel's existence where a king did not exist. Kings came to exist, but they didn't exist at this point. And when the kings came to exist, now, we get more than just the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, because Moses' head is filled with additional laws that are not etched on the stones, but they come out of Moses' mouth and the people are instructed. And those additional laws come out, I don't want to say in dribs and drabs, because they actually come out in large chunks. So they come out immediately after this in Exodus. They come out very dramatically. The whole book of Deuteronomy, as we've seen, are these stipulations, which is this law that the people are to observe. And the law itself is very interesting. What is the character of the law? These are not, you have to give me your cigarette ration in order to keep from being beaten up. These are a whole lifestyle of ways to live, which reenact the liberation that happens at Exodus. We said that last time. And that there is much to be learned about the nature of God and the nature of humanity, of who we are, by studying these, even if for some reason they are no longer applicable, as is largely the case for us. We don't do these things. Can't. I mean, we don't have, I joked about the oxen getting caught in the ditch. But we can learn from that. We get principles from that. Or the financial principles that we looked at last time. So there's the disempowerment of the king and the royal implication of the people. Now this is going to start to get kind of juicy, because the question of the power of the king, or the top person, is very much at the heart of this election that we're in right now. And we have an explicit proposal to re-empower, or to take away any disempowerment, any checks on the power and authority of the king that is coming in this Project 2025. So now, one of the things that I've forgotten to say that I do want to say is that there's a lot of material. Am I making sense, or did I hope I didn't lose you 20 minutes ago. So the idea of form criticism makes sense to you, because you know, as you go on in Bible, in study of the scriptures, we're going to run into that, and it's going to yield much fruit that's quite different than this. But that's an important idea, and that the way that is mapped onto the text at this point in the Pentateuch, that's something. Now, the thing that I also wanted to say is that among those laws that came down are explicit forms of the king being disempowered, and this is very reminiscent of our own Constitution. This is why there's a rich irony. Yesterday, George and Merle and I and any others of us, Sarah was there, where we had a gathering of the Minnesota Interracial Book Club, and there were others there too who had interest in the same kind of thing. And we had a talk, and we had a rudimentary presentation of the character that 25
put out by the Wall Street Journal.
yeah, that I observed that too. That's that was.
We should circulate it.
Say that again, please.
We should circulate that video that the Wall Street Journal did.
Yes, and if you'd like, I can make a copy of the text. We won't print it, but I have a PDF of it that I did a search, and I did a little work in it yesterday. This is the Project 2025 document, which is 900 pages
It's
long. If you
incredible.
want a copy of it, let me know, and I'll get it in electronically. I'll send it as an email attachment, or I'll make a link where you could dial into it, but you can find it on the net. So, okay, there's that. Let's talk about that in a minute. I don't know why I put my sequence this way, but what I want to tell you is that will someone turn to Deuteronomy 17:14 through 20? Deuteronomy 17:14 through 20. Or if you have a Bible, find it for yourself, and I'll do the reading of it.
Here it is. When you have come,
Yeah, go ahead, George.
when you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, "Oh, I will set up a king over me, like all the other nations."
Let me
around
interrupt, if I may, and then it would be helpful if you'd read on. But let me say this: when you enter into the land, and then let us set up a king over us. In ancient societies round about Israel, the king was the head military guy. And if a nation was going to invade a land, as Israel did into the land of Canaan, which was settled, there were people there, that would have been clearly a military operation and would have been led by a king. Now, there was leadership. It was Joshua, but he did not have that royal status, nor did Moses, and so on. So that the implied king is God's self here. So there is no king, and this begins a trend where there are other evidences in the Old Testament where the king is not empowered to be the head military person. Sorry, I don't know. And we can. How about we read verse 15?
You may not. You may indeed set over you a king, whom the Lord your God will choose. One of you, your own community, you may set as a king over you. You are not permitted to put a foreigner over you who is not of your own community. Even so, he must not acquire many horses or for himself, or return the people to Egypt in
may I
order to acquire
interrupt and,
more horses.
yeah, may I comment now? Horses are it's clear that that is a military image. You know, they were the tanks of the ancient times, and Egypt was rich with horses. If you wanted to pump up your cavalry, and they had cavalry and infantry back then. The infantry were the foot soldiers. The cavalry was the high-tech form of fighting. So when they are disallowed from having a cavalry or much of a cavalry, which had to be acquired in Egypt, then see, Egypt had the chariots, you know, they had the horses, but others didn't have that. So we're getting a comment in the law, in the stipulations for the relationship with God, about how much military is appropriate. Okay, George. 17.
Mark, to continue reading?
Yes, please.
Oh. Even so, the king must not acquire many horses for himself or return to the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses there. Since the Lord has said to you, you must never return to that way again. And he must not acquire, the king is, that is, he must not acquire many wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Also, silver and gold he must not acquire in great quantity.
The wives get categorized with the silver, gold, and horses. Well, I'm sorry to
What kind of a king is that?
well, imagine that among the benefits of being the king, you know, you've got all the books and you've got all the scribes and you've got all the horses and you've got all the land and you've got all the gold, but you've also got all the women. So there's a limit on the size of the harem. Sorry, I had to say that, or that you had to hear it. And so there's another limitation on the power of the monarch. All right, well, let us move quickly beyond that to the 18th verse. George.
Okay. When he had taken the throne of his kingdom, he shall have a copy of this law written for him in the presence of the Levitical priests.
Yes. So the priests, again, it's the power of the king to actually make the laws. Here, unfortunately, he has to live under the law. Now, I can't imagine a leader that doesn't want to live under the law. But here it is, he has to live under the law. And that the scroll of the law is not something that comes out of his head. Okay, it comes from the Levitical priests. So this king, I mean, the king is really shrinking here at least in the vision of Deuteronomy, is that, you know, no girls, no horses, no gold and silver. That's a big one right there, because we talked last time about the palace and the temple acquiring so very much land and wealth is out there. All right. And then let me just read the 20th verse and move on, because I hate how much time this is consumed, but it ends up saying, the king must not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites and turn from the law to the right or to the left, and that he and his descendants will reign a long time over the kingdom of Israel. In other words, the king is not above the law. Imagine that. That they would put that limitation in place in the Old Testament. Now, obviously, I'm speaking ironically, because that's the very that's the very issue at so Project 2025 strongly supports what is a popular idea in some political circles that right now, the unitary executive theory. We heard that term yesterday, which centralizes authority within the presidency. This authority holds that the president has the ultimate control over the executive branch, acting with minimal checks from the branches of government. The authors of Project 2025 advocate for a maximalist version of this theory, emphasizing that the president should be able to direct the entire executive branch without interference from the courts, the Congress, or the Levitical priests. The plan refers to Article 2 of the US Constitution as giving the president full control over the executive branch and proposes measures like reinstating Executive Order 13957, which would reclassify federal employees to make them easier to remove based on political considerations. This aligns with their broader goal of reshaping the federal government and to enhance presidential power, particularly in areas like the Department of Justice and the federal law enforcement agencies. So I would suggest by way of closing that Deuteronomy 17 verses 14 through 20, which George has read to us, is a commentary on that part of the Project 2025 document.
The thing that's jumping out at me is in Deuteronomy, there's no separation of church and state as we define it now in modern terms. They're very combined. The religion is very intermixed with the government management.
The actually there is a sweeping, and I have not made this clear. There's a sweeping separation of church and state. There's the office of the prophet, for example. The office of the prophet comes from nowhere but God. And anybody can be raised as a prophet, and that they become a voice of criticism that is legitimized in Old Testament theology. The fact that about a third of the old, this is a stunning reality. A third of the Old Testament is filled with profound prophetic loyal opposition to the direction of the leadership and the people too of Israel that is completely independent. So, and purports to be the very voice of God speaking into the people. And the prophets had esteem, a great deal of esteem. I remember there's a painting of the prophet Jeremiah ridiculing. Who was Jeremiah? Hezekiah?
Who is what?
The king who had to endure Jeremiah. Is the king Jehoshaphat?
I think it's Jehoshaphat.
Well, whoever was the king during the siege of Jerusalem, and the line drawing was a picture of Jeremiah with his finger right in the face of the king. And I think that's the spirit of prophecy. Or Nathan confronting David with, the story where after he had his dalliance with Bathsheba, and that great story where he ends up, you are the man. You are the man, yeah. So there's that. A second factor here is that the Levitical priesthood is not subject to the king. In other words, the priestcraft, the operation of the temple is not a kingly kind of thing. And we see that anticipated when David wants to build the temple. And initially, God forbids that. And that gets kicked down to Solomon's. So that would be that's part of the disempowerment. So the disempowerment is economic, it's religious. See, the kings enjoyed this great religious legitimation in other places. The kings, Well, in the ancient world and even in the contemporary world, if you get very powerful, everybody from Julius Caesar to Nebuchadnezzar, to all of these kings, they all get the big head, and they think they're gods, and they begin to be worshipped as gods. And that's what they got the Christians in such trouble with the Caesars, is that hey, we're not gonna burn incense, which is an act of worship, to the Caesar. No, 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 because we don't believe they're divine. We have one God. So that's another. Ancient society was one way. Biblical religion was quite different. All
One
right,
interesting contemporary aspect of that is the British monarchy. The King or Queen of England is responsible to go to Edinburgh for the opening of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church of, or the Church of Scotland. And the reason behind that is to make sure that those dissenters up in Scotland would just cool it. And so the monarch comes to kind of give a blessing to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, and but realizing that historically the dissenting movement in Scotland had this enormous influence over all of Britain, and so the monarch goes to cool things down up there. I just always thought that was a kind of,
yeah.
I mean, if the president of the United States showed up at the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, we'd all faint, I think.
We're lucky if a reporter shows up.
No.
The little inside Presbyterian humor. I'm really right now. I'm at high ebb of being pleased to be Presbyterian, being pleased to be minister in our tradition. I know we're a lot smaller than when I was ordained, and I don't think there's a relationship there, but. Anyway, I think that our tradition breathes with these principles that, and I think much of constitutional America breathes with this. But it's an eye opener to see how, for me, it's so refreshing to see how prominent it is in the very best interpretation of the Old Testament, that you can honestly say at so many different levels, hey, the story here is everyone matters.
Well, I think the position of the judges in the Old Testament is so powerful, because they not only spoke to the reigning king, said, you've messed things up, you had a copy of that law and you're not following it.
Did you want to say prophets?
The prophets.
The prophet, yeah,
prophets,
yeah.
But they also speak to the people broadly. You were given this covenant. God's been faithful to his part of the covenant, and you have not been faithful to your part of the covenant. You need to shape up.
Yeah.
It's a very rich tradition, I think.
I ran across this beautiful idea, is that Israel, or the land, never became fully what it was intended to be, because the people never became fully what they were intended to be. And that to me goes back to some of the stuff that I'm learning about creation. Is the hey, I passed this out. This idea of the royal character of the human being. Eric is, by the way, is very interested in the nature of the human, and so we're going to hear more about that from him. And he and I are already plotting, some work in that area. So look out. There is something that stretches all the way through, is that we're not nobodies. We're not, the human is, through the eyes of our faith, there is a sense in which we are elevated to royalty or to peership, to make up a word, with the Creator. And we bear God's nature in some sense. Now, we're creatures, but we bear God's nature in the image and likeness of God. And we also bear God's creative task and destiny. We work side by side with God, just as Noah worked side by side with God to rescue, to do the best he could. And Noah really, his efforts were greatly magnified for one man. Couldn't rescue the whole world from human sin, nor apparently could God. But about Noah, it is said, this is a tangent. He was the first, and so far as I know, the only man in the Bible about whom it is said that this is a righteous man.
Is what?
This is a righteous man.
Noah was a righteous.
Noah was a righteous man. Had you ever heard that before? The only person?
I think it's the only time it appears in scripture.
Yeah. No.
Well, the women's Bible study this week was Ezekiel and being taken with the other leaders, priests and so on in the Babylonian invasion, and blaming the leaders of Judah for not following God's wishes, the covenant, and letting the larger animals trample on the food around the water holes and environmentally degrading for lesser, for more vulnerable people. And
It's all the king's fault.
it was, it really was amazing because we got the